Hello and welcome to Pluribus Unum's Fireside Chats. Not as good as for yours, but hey, it's something. Oh boy, this episode is definitely going to be very interesting. Before it begins, I just want to state very clearly, this is just a more, informative piece, I guess. I don't know if it would be necessarily the most informative, I don't know. This is just something that I felt like, might as well talk about this now. Because I'm sure a lot of you guys in the sphere might have some things racking in your brain right now, and I just want to say, let's just try and get things clear in our brains. Alright, with that out of the way, let's get right into the news. First news story, first just a quick update from Uganda, shock of all shocks. Currently Yoweri Museveni is winning, and shock of all shocks, Bobby Wine is currently being arrested because he dared to run against Museveni. You know, again, not much really to be said. It's just kind of expected that this was going to happen. You know, the elections in Uganda have not necessarily been, they just generally have not been really good. You know, with all the rigging, shock of all shocks. It's just clearly not really doing so hot. But there's not much else for me to say on that. Let's move on to the next story. Another story that's not going to have much to say because it's just kind of very self-evident how things are. Okay, so the Israeli Knesset is basically passing a bill that is invoking the death penalty for terrorists, really Palestinians, but the way that this death penalty is being done is that they're mandating that all the people who are killed by this death penalty, again, only Palestinians are under the the Israelis still do not face the death penalty. The death penalty is not a thing in Israel proper, but Palestinians exclusively will get the death penalty if they are perceived to be in any situation like antithetical to what the country of Israel wants. And remember, this is the same country that has labeled basically everyone and everything under the sun as a terrorist for saying anything remotely indicative of not supporting the Israel Zionist position 130 million% of the time. But they're implementing that all the people who are executed on this will be executed by hanging. And there's a reason why they want them to be executed by hanging, because it is to evoke the imagery of Palestinians that have been lynched by Israeli lynch mobs. That was the whole point of this death penalty to begin with. It was to evoke the memory of lynch mobs, and that is very much greatly exclusively amazing. Just wow. Just again, I remember when people used to be subtle about their political propaganda and kind of stuff, but nah. At this point, it's just it's just nice that the fascists just want to be extremely cartoonishly evil. That's just super fun. Again, there's not much else for me to say because, what else is there? Obviously, this is being done for a particular political reason, and it's obviously a bad political reason. And let's move on to the next story. Another one that is probably going to be short, but again, it's just interesting. I just wanted to read this. Okay, so listen to this. House Republican introduces bill to let Trump annex Greenland. Okay, that's very interesting. A House Republican, Monday, introduced legislation that would give President Trump the authority to annex Greenland and turn it into a U.S. state. And that was very interesting when I read that out. But the one thing that interested me was, who was the Republican that did it? Who was the Republican that made the active decision to introduce a law into the United States House of Representatives that would call for the forcible annexation of a piece of land that has no business to be related to the United States? I wonder which member of Congress introduced this bill. Now, I don't have to wonder because I already know who it is, but I'm just saying, let's just get it out of the way. It was Randy Fine. It was Randy Fine. It was, I was thinking, what? I was literally thinking when I saw it, there's no way it's him, right? There is no way it's him, right? But sure enough, it was him. Bro, the member of Congress who, when he first got in, literally wanted to kick the 2 Muslim members of Congress out of their, literally wanted to annex their fucking districts, now is like really running on, I want to annex another people's land. It's like, wow, Randy, you're doing a great job. I'm sure the anti-Semitism just will completely disappear with you on the watch, man. Again, not much else for me to say, so let's move on to the next story. This one is not necessarily going to be that much political, but I'm just gonna get this one out of the way because I'm just gonna break it and have a little bit of a positive story here. Okay, so over 100 episodes of classic Sesame Street have arrived to YouTube. YouTube is now the home to the largest digital library of Sesame Street content, with the arrival of over 100 older classic episodes of the show as first announced last year. The YouTube's collection of Sesame Street episodes spans the series' history as an announcement for the streaming launch mentions. More than 100 full Sesame Street episodes from previous seasons are now available on YouTube and the YouTube Kids app for the first time. This includes episodes from recent seasons, as well as some of the most beloved moments from Sesame Street history that fans have been waiting for. That includes the show's first episode from 1969, and highlights like the Mr. Rogers episode, the Big Bird Snuffleupagus reveal, which you can now stream on Sesame Street's Classics YouTube channel. The YouTube deal is just the latest new platform in the series. Starting last year, you can now visit Netflix, stream new episodes of the show, and also airing on PBS and PBS Kids. Now, there's of course bad reasons why this is happening. This is happening because PBS is of course losing funding, and as such, a lot of their programming is sadly going away. There was like a weekend news thing that literally just completely is gone now. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which is one of the main financiers of Sesame Street, had to shut its doors down recently, and they had to make a desperate plea. It's like, guys, like PBS Kids is still up, but they also had to say like, but I'm just saying, maybe consider floating a couple of dollars to your local PBS station, just in case. So, of course, while bad things are happening, there is good about it coming out of it. Because, like I said, again, Sesame Street is now being streamed on YouTube for free. At least 100 episodes of Sesame Street are now being released on YouTube for free to be watched by children around the world. Which is good. This is the place where children are now going to get their entertainment. So it makes sense for us to transition this programming to go to the places that children are more likely to watch them. That's a good thing. And I want Sesame Street to go one step further. I want there to be a PBS YouTube channel that uploads every single show that has been made by PBS. Not just a PBS Kids channel, a PBS news channel, a PBS everything. I want PBS to have free libraries for all. Literally, all of it. And I've noted hypocrisy in regards to some of this in the past. For example, I've noted that the fact that there was a museum called the Museum of Public Broadcasting that had a Sesame Street episode that was hidden behind a paywall that you had to go there in person to see. Actually, there were 2 episodes, I think, that they did that with. But the one in that video about piracy video, it was only talking about the one about the Sesame Street lost episode about the Wicked Witch of the West. But it didn't. But there's also, and that one, they also had the Snuffleupagus divorce episode, because that was one of the most controversial episodes of Sesame Street, because it was the one where they really didn't get the message right. And that was, I guess you got to give credit to that. That's the only reason why it's not publicly available. I'll give credit to that. That one kind of makes slightly more sense to not be in the public light than the Wicked Witch of the West episode. But again, I would prefer that one to be at the very least available. Maybe include a citation at the front and be like, hey kids, this is a Sesame Street episode that didn't really get the message out right, so just keep that in mind. Or maybe watch this with an adult or something like that. But again, I think these kinds of things should be readily available for free for everyone to consume. And hopefully, and we're seeing, because I mentioned this before, in a previous episode where I was where people were seeing that 60 Minutes story, and then it's they just started downloading it and then posting it. It's hopefully we're going to see that, and we're going to see more of that rise. And, especially with a rise of me giving some episodes to kind of explain why the copyright system is a little bit bad and cringy and, that kind of stuff. Be on the lookout for those episodes when I eventually start making new episodes. Okay, so now that we got the only good news story out of the way, let's move on to the bad news story. Okay, so medical examiner believes that death of man in ICE custody was a homicide. When the U.S. Immigration Customs Enforcement announced on a January 3rd death of a detainee, Geraldo Lunas Campos, at a Texas detention center, the agency and staff observed him in distress and gave no cause of death. An employee of El Paso's county offices of the medical examiner told Lunas Campos' daughter this week that subject to the results of a toxicology report, the office is likely to classify the death as a homicide, according to record of the conversation. In the recording, which the daughter shared with the Washington Post, the employee said that the doctor there is listing the preliminary cause of death as asphyxia due to neck and chest compression, which means Lunas Campos did not get enough oxygen because pressure on his neck and chest. Pending the results of a toxicology report, the staffer said on the recording, our doctor is believing that we are going to be listing the manner of death as a homicide. And this comes after there was another news story. I don't know if this was the same news story or a different news story, but there was literally the news story talking about how there was a 16-year-old kid who was also almost choked out by ice. And yeah, again, this is another news story of ICE doing the thing that police officers and law enforcement are well known to do, excessive force for the use of violence. And yeah, that's very depressing. And this comes after the other news story where it was that guy who was allegedly suicided, but very clearly was not suicided. But again, there's really not much more I can say because, again, it's just this seems like a very cut and dry news story. Man who was in ICE custody was found strangled to death, and they're ruling it as a homicide. What else is there to say? Moving on to the next story, a depressing news story. Trump has threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act in response to the Minneapolis protests. The President Donald Trump, Thursday, threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act in response to rising tensions between protesters and federal personnel in Minneapolis. If the corrupt politicians in Minnesota don't obey the law and stop the professional agitators and insurrectionists from attacking their patriots of ICE, who are only trying to do their job, I will institute the Insurrection Act, which many presidents have done before me, and quickly put an end to this travesty that is taking place in the once great states. Now, there are a lot of things to say. One, Trump has threatened to incite the Insurrection Act before, and it didn't work. He tried to incite the Insurrection Act due to the George Floyd protesting, but that didn't really work. So I don't know how successful it's going to be, but this is really more of a compounding factor that's going to be touched upon in a later news story. And one thing to mention is that Donald Trump is apparently trying to do criminal investigations into Tim Walz and Jacob Frey now, allegedly, even though, again, they haven't really done anything wrong. But let's move on to the next news story, and it's local representation news. It's about issues regarding the possible elections in North Carolina. Amid protests, NC Elections Board rejects campus voting sites and Sunday voting in several counties. NC A&T State University students packed the North Carolina State Board of Elections meeting in Raleigh to support an early voting site on their campus for the upcoming primaries. When the board adopted a plan without a voting site on the Greensboro campus, students stood with their signs near the front of the room beside their presenters' desks. After a student said board members wouldn't look them in the eye, board chairman Francis DeLuca threatened to call the cops on the students if they didn't leave. One student said the outcome would have been different if the group was white. DeLuca said he resented the suggestion. Polling places will also no longer be put on places like Elon University and Western Carolina University, despite the fact that they have also held positions, having areas of voting people, voting places. Just for a little bit of explanation, Greensboro, which is where one of these universities are, 55.2% of the population is not white. Elon University is a little interesting because the city of Elon is one, it's not that populous to begin with, but it's also very super majority white. But I think it's because also two things. One, of course, just the fact that there will be less polling places means that there's going to be less people likely to vote, and also because these polling places are at universities, and there's going to be a wild chance that these are polling places for people who are particularly younger, younger voters. And yeah, there seems to be still some issues possibly doing with elections, and Donald Trump goes one step further by floating the possibility of skipping the midterms in the most recent midterm, skipping the most recent midterms. Now, to be fair to everyone, because this is the one thing that I gotta say, to be fair, apparently, this is the full quote of what he said. Let's be fair. The full quote is, it's some deep psychological thing, but when you win the presidency, you don't win the midterms. When you think of it, we shouldn't really have an election. So very clearly, he's, quote unquote, like, that's the thing. It's like, he's making a joke about the fact that, again, when you win the presidency, typically you don't win the midterms. And I think some people pointed out, like, I think there was like a similar, like a joking poll, like a joking, like, news article that said something about like Obama canceling the midterms or something like that. Difference is, Obama also didn't try to overthrow an election that he lost, and also didn't try to, wasn't floating around doing another term, despite the fact that he was constitutionally ineligible to run for another term, wasn't allying with people who illegally sought multiple terms after they lost, like after they shouldn't have been getting more terms, like Nayib Bukele. Barack Obama didn't have somebody literally introduce a bill into the United States House to allow them to seek another term after office. So again, it's just like, there seems to be a very obvious difference in, the tendency, when this also again ties into a previous point. Donald Trump floated using the Insurrection Act. And it's after he has mentioned the fact there are situations where you could cancel elections. He brought up, like, Ukraine, you cancel elections when you're in the middle of a war. That's interesting to point out. It's like, why is that interesting to point out again? The U.S. has literally taken pride in the fact that even in our most dire situations, such as the Great Depression, such as the, World War II, such as the Civil War, we still held an election. It doesn't matter. We still felt the need that our democratic constitutional rights superseded anything else. And that's one of the things that we can and should take pride in. That no matter the situation, we still show up to vote. Even when we still think that the vote is meaningless. Like, even when we all thought, like, the Democrips and their Bloodlickens, they're just ruining the country and blah, blah, blah. Even when we did that, we still turned out to vote, didn't we? Even if we turned out to vote simply to, just voice our discontent with the major two parties by voting for a new person, hey, we still showed up and allowed our constitutional rights to be heard. Anyways, with that out of the way, let's move on to the main topic of this episode. Guns. A very hotly debated topic in the United States and America. Hell, it's a widely discussed topic all around the globe. The USA probably has one of the most well-known gun cultures in the world, which has led to a lot of issues, a lot of debate, a lot of discussion. It's just a lot of stuff has happened in regards to that. And why don't we use this time to talk about it? I don't think I really talked about guns that much. I haven't talked about guns a lot. I think I talked about very early on. I've talked about it every here and there, but not really in depth, I guess. Because I gotta be real, it's not really a subject that I want to particularly discuss because I'm a pacifist by nature. I believe nonviolence is better than violence. Violence, shock all the shocks, is cringe. I've never gotten into a fight or like a physical fight, much less done anything that really relates to any form of gun culture in America, except for maybe consuming violent media. I had a lot of gun toys when I was a kid, but I guess they're still around, but I don't really have a lot of guns because I don't want to. And I really only talked about the subject of guns didn't really help because of the way that I would have to talk about guns on this channel usually comes from very bad situations. But, again, let's just use this time to get this out of the open right here, right now. Let's just get this out of the open because, I'm sure there are a lot of people who are starting to pay attention to the news and they're starting to maybe rethink some things. Maybe it's some things that you're truly rethinking your entire philosophy about, or you're just taking a second glance or something like that. And everything in regards to the United States' gun culture started way back in the day with 27 simple words. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. the Second Amendment to the Constitution, the right to bear arms, the amendment that a lot of people would argue is actually the most important amendment. I would argue that no singular amendment truly is above the rest, with maybe the exception of Amendment 1. Like, I guess I should probably ask, what amendment do you all think is the best? I would say probably just like de facto, Amendment 1 really is the one that kind of just takes the cake. But all the amendments do have their importance. That's why they were put in these documents. And while most, if not all, the amendments do have some debate and varying interpretations about it, the Second Amendment is obviously the one that has the most debate and discussion around it, going all the way down to simply looking at the words as they exist to try and figure out if there is some hidden meaning behind it. There's a very famous Penn and Teller bullshit episode where they literally go over the Second Amendment and talk about how there's literally, let's read it again. A well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Because it's kind of the amendments usually talk about multiple things into kind of one thing, getting across a broader point. But it's talking about, one, a well-regulated militia, and also talking about the right to bear arms. So the question is coming from does the right to bear arms extend to that militia? Or is are they saying the people are that militia inherently? Or are there two separate interpretations in that same sentence? Then you get into sort of that broader understanding of the people well, yes, but this was written in the 1700s, so they only had this weapon and this weapon and this weapon. If they knew how weapons would be nowadays, then there'd probably be a little bit of an addendum, a little bit of a writing extension, a little bit of a here and there about trying to figure out what this really, really means. Even to the point where, similar to how amendments are kind of done, because this is another thing with the amendments. The amendments were made at a particular time period, but now they represent more broader things. The amendment, in the Constitution it says stuff all men are created equal, but we of course know in America nowadays that when it says all men are created equal, it does not literally just mean every single man is created equal and no one else is equal. We understand that when they use the phrase man, they mean mankind, as in humankind. Now, sure, sometimes we have to rely on the abstract thought about it, and then sometimes we have to just explicitly write things down. Much like how originally it was all men are created equal, but then somehow it excluded black men. But then we added that amendment to the Constitution that said, no, we mean men of all colors, of all places of where you're born, blah, blah, blah. Every man. And then we now extend that to be we didn't have to write an amendment to say and women, and all non-binary people, and all trans people, and all. We didn't have to write those amendments too. We just had to then go okay, but but we understand what this means. That's the thing. It's do you interpret a literalist interpretation or a abstract interpretation? That's kind of also where another element of it kind of goes, because there was that Supreme Court case that changed a little bit of how the Second Amendment was to be portrayed. Because up until a decent number of time, the Second Amendment was really interpreted to just mean, it was meant to mean, in the most literal sense, that the people should have arms in case there ever needed to come a time where there had to be another revolution. Because literally at the time period, they just fought the King of England. And they're we just did a revolution. And people were concerned, what if a situation has to arise where that has to happen again? And then, that was why that amendment was written. But then in that same vein, there were people at the time period who felt that the government at the time was already reaching that point where they had to do another revolution with the Whiskey Rebellion. And then the federal government came in and squashed that rebellion. So even though that was kind of why the amendment was written in the first place, we're already seeing that there's still some elements of the amendment that really didn't really work out so well. Or at least for the people who felt that amendment was being exerted in this way. And then we had that Supreme Court case, which then argued, the Second Amendment now just means using to have guns to defend yourself, even though that's not what the amendment says at all. The amendment has absolutely nothing to do with you defending yourself, or the hunting. Because some people also point out, the Second Amendment's for hunting. No, it's not. It has nothing to do with hunting. It has nothing to do with hunting or personal gun use for whatever fun times you want to do, or personal defense. It has nothing to do with that. But we interpret those broader things to be included into those things. And I mean, in all this time, I have reached one conclusion about all of this, I will say. I will have to grant this. Of all of the political issues in the world, I would say that the gun issue is the only one where I can really say there really isn't like a quick fix, one thing protects everything. Like, I'll say that. That's the one thing I will say. Because, I mean, granted, no issue truly has like a quote-unquote quick fix, but there are a lot of issues I would say that there's at least one thing we can do and then set a plan forward to do this thing. Guns are ones that are, of course, slightly more complicated. Not completely complicated, because I think I could still come up with a coherent, like, idea, but, I mean, otherwise, it is still at least somewhat... It's still somewhat complicated. Okay, so let's just get into a little bit of, like, elements about it, how it gets a little complicated, especially because of the one element. And it's the fact that the political right in America and a lot of other places really do not like to they intentionally muddy the waters to the point where debate and discussion on guns is just impossible. For a long time, the right has claimed for years that the left's political view on the gun issue was to quote-unquote ban all guns, and that their stance on the issue was quote-unquote protecting our inalienable Second Amendment rights. When, quite literally, none of that's true. There's not been a single politician on the left or even liberals who have seriously advocated for banning all guns, like especially in the United States. That's just not true. Maybe the closest one is Robert Francis O'Rourke, and then maybe people get like slightly angry about it right when a mass shooting happens. But it's just like, even then, I don't think he advocated for literally banning all guns, but he was a bit more, I guess, stringent on, gun issues than other people, I would say. But I guess he lived through too many mass shootings. It makes even less sense when you literally know anything about where the left and liberals stand on political issues. They are the people who understand that a blanket ban on things just doesn't work. Drugs, you can't, we understand the drug war has led to massive problems by just blanketly saying ban all drugs. We understand that when alcohol prohibition was a thing, it led to a lot of trouble. We understand the banning of prostitution has clearly led to a lot of problems. Like, a blanket ban on a lot of things just can't, very few things can just be blanket banned and then resolve and then solve the issue. All you really do for a lot of this is shift the people who will supply the stuff to the black market. And also, their stance that they're the ones protecting the inalienable Second Amendment rights is laughable to me for a couple of reasons. One, that's not true. There are many times where right-wing politicians and pundits and figures have advocated for gun control, and I'll get into a couple of examples, and a couple of examples have a very obvious implication, but there's also another thing. I just gotta say this. I gotta say this right here and now. I just gotta be real. I kind of don't believe inalienable rights exist. I'm just saying, I know this statement probably comes off as 12-year-old is pretending to be deep and philosophical, but I'm just saying, if we had inalienable rights, why would we have to put the rights on paper? If we all had rights endowed to us by a creator or any sort, if that were just inalienable to us, that they can never be taken away, why would we have a law that explicitly says we have those rights? And why could those rights then just be disappeared by writing a new piece of paper? The U.S. Constitution said all men created equal. Why did it take until the 1800s for us to realize, oh yeah, all men are created equal? Why was there a whole fucking war about that concept? If these rights were so inalienable. If we said in the book, in the magical piece of paper that we say is important, it says the right for the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. If that was an inalienable right that was guaranteed to everybody from birth by their almighty creator, then why were the first gun control laws in the United States passed to prevent black men, freed black men who were not slaves, black men who were freed who had the constitutional rights, why were they forbidden from getting guns? Well, they were forbidden from getting guns because they were worried that they were going to lead a slave rebellion. Wait, hold on. I thought the whole point of the Second Amendment was, that whole tyrannical government thing. And, the possibility that they would need to fight back. So literally, the thing that the amendment was written for was being suppressed by the people who were governed by the law that says that that's allowed. Same thing with the Whiskey Rebellion. Like, the Whiskey Rebellion was crushed very easily, even though they were arguably exerting those Second Amendment rights that they were doing. Conservative diehard figurehead Ronald Reagan introduced gun control when the Black Panther Party was exercising their Second Amendment rights, and they weren't even doing it for the sake of like a rebellion. They were literally doing it purely for the self-defense reason. The NRA literally helped Reagan pass that bill. When trans women nowadays want to exert their Second Amendment rights, now magically conservatives are shook to the core. When anti-ICE protesters say that they should show up armed next time to prevent an incident, suddenly conservative reactionaries are, denouncing him. Even though these are the same guys who have also showed up armed to many protests of their own. When Graham Plattner reveals that he was at one point a member of the Socialist Rifle Association, oh no, he's so radical, oh my goodness, oh no. Like, Graham Plattner is literally just a guy who was a member of a fucking gun club. Literally most, if not all, conservatives are gun nuts that are part of multiple gun clubs. That's, again, part of our gun culture, that there are so many gun clubs and that guns are just super common. Literally, there are people who walk into stores with, that are literally, they're walking around with, their guns strapped around their chest. There was that one fucking meme where it's this one guy in a fucking Starbucks or something, and he's like, liberals, I'm not offended by anything. And it shows he has 5 guns on him. It's dude, you're why are you so scared out of nothing? You're scared of what? It's so weird. And now we have a bunch of new people who claim to be Black Panthers who are doing the exact same thing as the original Black Panthers, showing up to protests with, weapons to show that they are not defenseless. Again, purely in a defensive capacity. Suddenly, magically they don't, magically no. Funny how these so-called inalienable rights have many alienable elements to them. Literally every single right that we have. The classic example, of course, is the First Amendment rights don't protect you to yell fire in a crowded room. Rights are not absolute by any means, and can be taken away like this in any semblance of the word. The rights that exist now, there are people who try to exploit them, and then those people who try to exploit them, they get repercussions for it in certain capacities. I don't really want to use a particular example. People, there's a certain I guess I'll just say it. NAMBLA NAMBLA, through the Constitution, is allowed to exist, apparently. They have a website. They seem to be at least somewhat active. They hold multiple meetings in multiple places, and it seems that they don't get arrested when they remain purely on the advocacy of the issue on a First Amendment clause. When they do things that go beyond that, which of course, given what NAMBLA tries to do, is very likely to happen, they then face the repercussions in other capacities, whether it be private matters or through the law if they go do a very explicitly bad thing. And yet I'm sure if tomorrow NAMBLA was they just announced that NAMBLA would no longer be an organization, all the members of NAMBLA would be arrested and they would all go to jail for whatever, just by being a member of NAMBLA. If that happened, I'm not sure a lot of people would complain. There are a lot of people who abuse the free speech issue to advocate for certain other things, like Amos Yee. If you don't know the story, basically imagine NAMBLA again. A guy, it was the same excuse that a guy from NAMBLA used, Allen Ginsberg, who literally advocated he said that he was a member of the organization because of a free speech issue, but then they're no, he was not. But that's just through that. Of course, as I mentioned before, there are rights that people have now that can and have been taken away very easily. People like literally took for granted, like the Supreme Court, gay marriage was legalized. But then now that it wasn't codified into law, it's now on the chopping block apparently. And even if it was codified into law, give it a few years to get enough people to vote for the law to be taken away. Remember the time that at one point in the United States, we could literally cultivate a plant in our own backyard free of all issues? And now all of a sudden, the U.S. government came in and said, no, this particular plant is now a bad plant. And now you can't cultivate that plant no more. There's a phrase that is very good. It's incorrect, but it's also correct. Freedom is not a noun. It's a verb. It's something that we cannot take for granted. Something we have to fight and keep fighting for. Most issues are not all v none. That's the problem. Like, people like to claim that their particular stance on an issue is like all versus none, like on issues of censorship. We're against censorship, or you're for censorship. That's like the straw man. Like the same thing, like, oh, we're us conservatives, we are for guns and freedom, but these liberals, they're like anti-guns and anti-freedom. It's like, no, that's not true. The issues are not one versus one. They're not absolutes. You're not 100% one and 100% the other. If you claim you are, you're just lying. You are just actively lying. The issue is how much, how much censorship are you for? How much censorship are you, like, that's the thing for censorship, the censorship issue. It's never you're 1% for censorship or you're 1% against censorship. I've made an argument before that literally just like, if you are 100% anti-censorship, there are so many things that you would just allow on your internet. If you are 100% against censorship, but you're not, no one is. Much in the same way, no one is 100% for like just unrestricted guns versus complete ban of guns. That's not true. But the true issue is how much gun control are you for or against? There's also a lot of things that have made people generally shift towards one direction. And this is the thing. Americans are 26 times more likely to be shot and killed than others in high-income countries. 117 people die every day due to gun violence. Not even to get started on the specifically mass shooting epidemic that, the United States has. For example, Virginia Tech, the Dark Knight shooting, Sandy Hook, Isla Vista, Charleston, Pulse, Vegas, Parkland, Tree of Life, Uvalde, Eaton Township Weiss Markets, Colorado Springs, Nashville, Annunciation Catholic Church. And those are the ones that I just remembered. I was scrolling through the wiki, and there were so many mass shootings. I literally only jotted down the ones that I had remembered. I remember this one, I remember this one, I remember this one. And I've mentioned this before. I've embargoed mass shooting stories on this channel before because literally so much was happening that I was just becoming completely desensitized to it. And the gun culture of the United States is to blame for that. And the fact that nothing gets done. Literally, the fact of the matter is, nothing gets done. This is what happens. Mass shooting happens. Liberals and leftists say, hey, this is kind of bad. We should do something about this. Conservatives cry and piss themselves. How dare you? Their bodies aren't even cold yet. And then also say, how dare you use their deaths to push for your evil, dirty political agenda? And it's just what the fuck are we literally supposed to do? You won't, when this doesn't happen, you're never going to talk about it. And then when this does happen, you say that we can't talk about it. It's is there a time that we can talk about this? No, there is no time for this. Because the point is, they care more about the gun culture of the United States than they do about dying children. That's the truth. There's another song I listen to a lot where it was literally it's a song. It literally says I'm trying to remember the exact lyric off the top of my head, but it was it's guns are more protected than a woman screaming stop. Because it's the fact of the matter is, people are more, they're more scared of getting their guns taken away than the very notion of, people protecting rape victims, protecting people who are literally victims of a lot of things, like gun violence and rape. My hot take theory is that I think that was purely intentional. I think conservatives were really because this is what happens. People really were we advocate for the tiniest amount of gun control. that's too far for them. So now a lot of people feel like that the only solution left is to maybe go further on the issue, like Beto O'Rourke. Beto Forever Francis O'Rourke. I keep trying to say, like, I'm trying to remember, like, the whole thing is, like, my thing is, like, I don't like calling him Beto O'Rourke. I like calling him Robert Francis O'Rourke. But, like, the point is, he was just like, oh, I just advocate, like, random gun control. But then he gets super radical when he runs for president, saying things like a mandatory buyback, that kind of stuff. Because, like, that feels like the only thing he has left to get people's attention on this issue. I think literally conservatives were trying to breed the anti-gun liberals that they wanted to fight against so bad. And in retrospect, the fact of the matter is, this issue really seemed like it was just a done deal when the conservative death cult won the issue in regards to Sandy Hook. I got that from the FD Signifier video in regards to, like, the conservative death cult again, but literally, just think about it. That was the day that America said that they much rather would have a bunch of white elementary school kids die than even think about possibly making a small sacrifice in gun ownership. Like, FT75 explains, like explicitly them being white kids is especially important in regards to this. Because people are willing to overlook the deaths of minority children, but white kids, especially, it's like, they are literally seen as, like, the smallest little angels in the world. Children are, of course, like, the most vulnerable. They're the most innocent in the world. That's literally like, one of the big things that everybody agrees upon. And we all collectively decide, like, I mean, I guess we all didn't collectively decide, but, like, the majority of the political class made the decision that they would much rather have kids spend the remainder of their days being scared to go to school for potentially the possibility of getting shot, than even thinking possibly of making any change to the gun legislation. They chose that over any sort of change, even when they themselves pay the freedom for that price. Like the late Charlie Kirk once said, it's worth to have a cost of unfortunately some gun deaths every single year so that we can have the Second Amendment. Now he is nothing more than a gun death statistic. I mean this literally. Charlie Kirk will not be in the popular lexicon in a couple of years. There are kids growing up now that literally are figuring out that 9/11 was a real thing that happened. Many kids literally think Charlie Kirk was just a creation of a meme. His entire legacy moving forward will be that photo, that video of him getting shot in the neck. That is all he will be known for. That is how Gen Alpha got introduced to Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk advocated literally for the position that killed him. Like, I mean, they like, these guys cry and piss and shit themselves about, like, Charlie Kirk got killed by a radical leftist, and there's still no evidence of that. But literally, guys, that leftist exerted their Second Amendment rights that you said he was allowed to exert. The liberals were the ones who said mentally ill people probably shouldn't have access to higher capacity firearms. You guys said, no, that's an infringement of personal liberty. Because that's what Charlie Kirk would have wanted. Charlie Kirk said himself, as again I stated, that was Charlie Kirk's own words. You can't blame me. Charlie Kirk is the one who advocated for that. The U.S. gun culture is literally one of the main reasons why a lot of the gun issues in the United States are just so bad. There are, like, it's a circular cycle. People see all the news stories about, like, the gun deaths and stuff, so a lot of them feel scared to go outside, which causes them to arm themselves a lot more, which leads to a lot more weapons to be created, thus leading them to circulate more, and et cetera, et cetera. Like, literally, it's a circular cycle. If more guns made everything safer, the US would be the safest nation on Earth. We're very clearly not. It's the same notion that leads us into thinking that over-policing leads to less crime. Far from it. It literally just gets worse. And that leads to another problem. In one of the elements that people get concerned about gun death and stuff, people then start thinking, hey, maybe the solution to the problem is to give more funding to the police and lessen the restrictions that police officers have. which then leads to the police officers to get more bad. You then push for more people to join the police force who may or may not be properly trained. You train them for situations that they're just not prepared for. Police officers are trained to shoot and kill. That is what they're trained to do. There was like a video I saw of like a police officer, like it literally just went over like how a lot of police officers have like these massive, basically military style budgets to do military style operations. And it's just like, but you're not going to be doing this stuff overwhelmingly. Like, you should train some people to handle these situations when they arise. You shouldn't be training every single person in this force to handle things with that extreme amount of force. And the less restrictions you put on the police force leads to the police force to get worse. Police now act as if they have impunity. Our so-called law enforcement then becomes the very force that people are afraid of. And these conservatives are somehow able to coincide, like, increasing police force budgets, and then also on the same level of, like, they're doing that, and then they're also waving gas and flags saying, "Don't tread on me," and then also saying, like, cosplaying as if they could lead a revolution or something like that. But I mean, a lot of people already make the meme about, like, look, guys, if there really was gonna be a revolution, you guys would fail. But it's like they usually bring it up with the military, but it's like, you don't even need the military. The police are willing. The police could silence that down. And what's weird is that all this happens, and I still think, like, the right inevitably really did want to breed the anti-gun liberal because they want to be able to fight their straw man. But they kind of did the work. Like, they, similar to a lot of issues that the right wing does, they chose really the dumbest solutions to try and make that issue happen. Because now things have gotten vastly different. As the left in the United States has drifted away from being liberal to being socialist, so too did their shift on gun rights. Because while liberals might not like guns a lot, and maybe a lot of leftists probably don't like guns either, there are some leftists, a lot of leftists, who don't really turn away from guns either. In fact, there are a lot of lefties that are kind of gun nuts. Almost on the same level as a lot of, right-wingers. And a lot of them are also pretty LARPy. And that's one of the big things about a gun culture. Being LARPy. Like, again, a lot of the American gun nuts literally do, like, they have those flags. They have, like, those things that make them seem like they're like, going to be the next, like, they're like, the South's going to rise again and all that other bullshit. Meanwhile, a lot of these lefties have those flags and have those things where they believe that they're going to lead the vanguard. I mean, it shouldn't be that surprising. Many left-wing movements around the world were unfortunately really only able to be done through violence. France, Russia, Mexico, Cuba, the Zapatistas, the IRA, FARC, the FMLN. Nobody likes it, but unfortunately, reactionaries would rather push things to a dark path before actually addressing the concerns directly. As Fidel Castro once said, revolutionaries didn't choose the armed struggle as the best path. It's the path that the oppressors impose on the people, and so the people only have two choices: to suffer or to fight. In the context of America, there was like in the Civil War, literally everybody tried desperately to try to end slavery the right way, through the legislative way, trying to advocate for the issue peacefully, trying to advocate for reforms, literally, like John P. Hale, Charles Sumner, all those people, literally, like Abraham Lincoln, like they all went through the right ways, like, getting elected to Senate, getting elected to the House, getting elected to whatever's, advocating for the issue on the floor, advocating for, like, peaceful measures, like, they're like, hey, there's some concerns, so here's a bill that we're going to do to try and, like, mediate the concerns. Abraham Lincoln literally ran and won a democratic election, and everything was like, we're happy hunky-dory. And then, every time they were met, like, every time they tried the peaceful routes, they were met with the not peaceful outcomes. Charles Sumner got beaten in the head for literally advocating peacefully for anti-slavery. And so some people felt that, unfortunately, the only route that they had left was the path of people like John Brown. George Washington and the American revolutionaries did the same thing. They wanted King George, like, literally, the whole phrase, remember, literally, the phrase was no taxation without representation. If they gave them representation, they would have accepted the taxation. But King George said, So again, they felt like the only route they had left was through the revolution, which of course would lead to the creation of the Second Amendment. As Malcolm X once said, sometimes you have to pick up the gun in order to put the gun down. I'm a pacifist, but of course I understand that there's some capacities where I would have to not be a pacifist. If I'm getting beat up by some big guy, I'm going to have to punch back. Now, another thing is that there are a lot of leftists that don't really do it for, like, the Second Amendment. The law exists, but they don't really do it for that. They do it for, like, the ideological element of it. A lot of African-American leftist gun ownership traces its roots to the Black Panthers and Malcolm X, which could probably be traced further back to older ideological thinkers of the left. As Eugene V. Debs once said, recollect that in arming yourselves, you are bound to do so, unless you are willing to be forced into abject slavery. You are safely within the spirit and letter of the law. To, of course, the most famous quote from Karl Marx, saying, under no pretext should arms and ammunition be surrendered. Any attempt to disarm workers must be frustrated by force if necessary. So, of course, there's those reasons, but then some people, they're not really doing it for, like, a broad ideological reason. They're just doing it for literally the most basic sense of self-defense. I've always understood, I don't like the concept of owning a gun because I don't like the concept of violence. But, again, given certain circumstances, there might be some cases where, of course, that might change. If I was beaten by somebody and mugged, maybe I would feel more safe if I had a gun. Much in the same way, there is a lot of women who get sexually assaulted, and the only way they feel safe is if they carry around in their purse a pistol. And in a lot of cases, there are people who have a lot of reasons to be scared in the modern day. Trans people are the ones who suffer a lot of the most terrible hate crimes currently in the United States. So naturally, they might feel a lot more safe if they had a weapon to defend themselves. And in the context of America, we literally have a law in place that says they are allowed to own a specific weapon that is pretty readily available given your area. And considering the areas where it's probably the most accessible are probably the places where they might suffer the worst hate crimes, there's clearly a bit of a connection. And as the rhetoric from the government gets worse in regards to trans people, the government of the United States is literally doing all of the most hateful, vile rhetoric against trans people, which encourages more down the road, down the bottom, random acts of violence. Can you really blame trans people for thinking, maybe to defend myself from these random acts of violence, I should possibly exert one of my constitutional rights for self-defense, mind you. Again, this is all in the context of defense. But of course, since the reactionaries do not see them as humans, they're arguing against them exerting the so-called inalienable rights they allegedly have. And that's literally the excuse that has always been done. They didn't believe that freed black men were human beings, ergo, they didn't have the right. They believed that the Black Panthers were not humans, ergo, they believed that they didn't have the right. They don't believe trans people are people, ergo, they believe they don't have the right. Leading them to denounce, the rush to denounce the things that they've been doing for years. Literally, there'll be, a trans person with, a gun, and they'll post a photo of themselves on Twitter, and it'll be, them loading up a gun with, a hammer and sickle flag in the background, and they're gonna be like, oh my goodness, how dare they? And meanwhile, they'll literally have, those same exact photos with, stars and bars in the background. Literally every single bumfuck redneck basically cosplays as if they're the next Washington or Robert Lee. And yet you're going to get mad that a trans person does the exact same cosplay as you? I could get mad because I understand, this is a stupid cosplay, but it's cool, but that's, I could call it cringe, but they're the ones with the guns and I don't. And even then, again, it's perfectly legal. They can buy that gun. There's nothing in there. I guess you could probably try and desperately dox them to try and figure out if their specific province has like an anti-gun law, but then you'd probably be like exerting, like you'd be giving favor to like a blue district probably, because the only laws that would be restricting them would be the ones in blue areas. And another reason why a lot of people are getting that perspective change is like literally because of the law enforcement. You know, unjust laws are now being forced to be followed, and the man who gives those orders is a criminal who's getting away with literally everything. Like, it recontextualizes a lot of things for a lot of people and kind of makes things a little less hypothetical in a lot of senses, especially when they pull the major red flag, because I've mentioned this before, and I'll mention it again. The conservative talking point, again, for a lot of things in regards to guns, has been for years that any single element of gun control is the government trying to build up to a massive oppression of them, you know, a massive oppression of, like, the people. You know, again, the whole argument behind the Second Amendment is, of course, you know, the people would have to possibly defend themselves if the situation needs to. You know, that's the same thing. Like, oh, Venezuela took away all the people's guns, and now look what's happened to them now. Look at what happened to this country who took away all the guns. Look at this country that took away all the guns, blah, 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 blah. But now, magically, they're saying, you know, all those trans girls with guns, we should probably stop them from getting guns. Huh, what's interesting? Why magically did you decide to change your mind now? Well, one day it was, you know, taking away guns equals, like, possible oppression and possible, like, bad things that the government's gonna try to do to these people. And magically now you don't want this specific subsection of the population to have guns? Interesting development. Almost as if maybe hypothetically you're trying to do something here. Now, of course, the goalpost has shifted again. I would probably argue that there could also be the context of them trying to build up the new radical, because, as I mentioned before, their original radical they wanted to do was like, oh, all the liberals and leftists hate guns, and now the new radical is formed. Now the left are the real violent ones, even though, again, political violence is almost exclusively done by the right, but it's the left that are the violent ones, even to the point where they pull out this, like, fucking stupid-ass statistic out of nowhere that not only... It's just stupid. Like, it's a fake statistic that I saw where it was like, red states own 96% of the guns, and yet blue states have 96% of the gun violence. Again, not only is this statistic, like, very obviously fake, but also, there's like even if this was hypothetically true, again, it's the simple concept of land doesn't vote, people do. It's like, wow, you pick the areas of the country that literally have like 15 trillion people in them, and then verse that with the states, the entire states that have like one farm family in them. It's like, wow, shocker. One city that has literally California is like, oh, California's got a lot of gun deaths. It's like, wow, the most populous state has like the most deaths? Huh, what an interesting concept. Again, the statistic isn't real, but also, these are the same people who still also pull the same bullshit thing of like, if there was a second civil war, the red states would win because we got the guns. Which, it's like, bro, I'm just saying, if that statistic is true, and literally 96% of the gun deaths are being caused by people with only 4% of the guns, I think you guys are in massive trouble if that's the case. If that's the case, but of course it's not the case. Literally the whole case is literally just like the shifting enemy. Like, the enemy is always both extremely powerful and extremely weak. Liberals and leftists are small, stupid, like fake gay college kids that don't know how to do anything about anything. They hate guns, they hate America, they're blah, blah, blah. But then also they're like these evil, violent radicals being like fundraised by all these like people all across the world. Like, on one end, they're like poor. On one end, it was the same thing with Hitler and the Jews. He believed they held all the financial power in the world and that they were like secretly ruining every single world government. They were secretly trying to take over the world government or blah, blah, blah. They're doing all this. Like, they're like somehow they're like these super powerful people, but they're so weak that Hitler can just waltz in and take over. Like, literally, it's just, yeah. The enemies are weak when you want them to be, but strong when you need them to be. And now, before anybody takes me out of context in any possible way, let me explain what my actual stances on gun issues would be. Now, let's just get some things out of the way. First of all, I never really opposed gun ownership. I don't think I've ever really opposed gun ownership at all, really. I mean, maybe, like, I feel like a slight, like, pit in my stomach and, like, get extra angry after that. Then again, also after, like, people in my personal life died of, like, alcoholism, you know, I briefly became a prohibitionist, so it was like, but it's like, it's just a mild emotional reaction, not really like an actual end-all be-all political discussion. Like, I mean, again, like, I've literally always said, like, I've never really blamed people who feel the need to defend themselves if they feel the need to. Again, like, I use that example. A woman, fresh out of college, she gets raped. A very sad event that happens. And the only way she feels safe is if she carries around a pistol everywhere she goes. She never has to shoot the pistol because I don't know, I guess she, like, does something else to try and make their situation better. But either way, that's the only way that she doesn't have a panic attack every day she steps out the door. Am I gonna really be like, oh, how dare you? No. If you live in a bad neighborhood and maybe you're like, maybe I should invest in, like, maybe I should get something, I'm not gonna blame you. You run a little ma and pa shop and then maybe you get, like, a gun that you put underneath the counter. Again, I'm not gonna blame you. That's just how it is. If you are a responsible gun owner, then that's one thing. Be that as it may, we also need to understand there are a lot of problems in the world that need to be addressed. And one of the big issues is, of course, gun violence. And we need to address a lot of things that can fix the gun crisis in America. And there are a lot of things that we can do to address these concerns. One, poverty. If we alleviate poverty, then violent crime is going to go down. That's a big fact. If we alleviate over-policing, violent crime will go down. These are statistical facts. When these things got worse, then these situations got worse. The mental health crisis. Conservatives cry every day, like, it's not a gun issue, it's a mental health issue. But you're not going to do anything to address the mental health issue because you don't care about the mental health issue. You want this as an excuse to scapegoat people. I actually want to address the mental health issue because I want more people to be and it's not just about guns. I want these issues to be solved regardless of guns. But this will just happen to coincide with also the gun issue being resolved in some capacity. But of course, there's also another big aspect about gun issues that should be addressed. And it's a big one. Gun control. Yes, there should be gun control. Just without a shadow of a doubt, gun control is a thing that needs to happen. We have heard so many stories of people who will literally be able to just buy a gun without doing anything. No background check, no big, literally, there's so much that is done that needs to be done. Like, mandatory background checks, obviously, which should include stuff like a criminal record and maybe a mental health record. For, like, a lot of issues, for one, you don't want a person who is suicidal to buy a gun and then be dead by the end of the weekend. You also don't want a guy who has a mental health issue that literally just wants to go and commit a mass shooting to commit a mass shooting. And another thing is simply you need to make it so that there's some, like, impeding levels to it. Like, I mean, I just gotta say, certain weapons should be easier to get than others. And I also say this is like, some of this is probably commonplace in certain areas, some other areas not so commonplace. But, like, simply put, again, like I said before, like, a handgun, whatever. Hunting rifle, sure, get, like, the proper permits for that stuff. Stuff like that, maybe a shotgun. I don't really know much about guns, to be honest. But, like, again, like, weapons that have a somewhat normal capacity that could be used for either, like, things that are very much not intended for very bad things. Unfortunately, you still can commit bad things with those weapons. That is the intention of them being created. And unfortunately, that is a thing that is just like, that's really a hard issue to really address. Like, I mean, again, aside from doing mental health checks, background checks of, like, past criminal activity, Otherwise, there's not much we can really do on that without really truly infringing on the rights. 3, I'm not particularly a fan of the US gun culture in general. I just don't really like it. And I generally do not believe that you should feel the need to have guns around you 24/7. Like me personally, I am in a position where I don't feel the need to walk around with a gun everywhere I go. Now, I do not necessarily walk around without any means to protect myself at all. But then again, I don't necessarily even feel the need that sometimes I need that with me 24/7. Will that situation change? I don't know. That's just yet to be determined. I can't speak for you in that regard. If you personally are in a situation where you think, maybe I should exert this right that has been bestowed upon me by this piece of paper, I don't necessarily blame you for feeling like you have to. Again, only for defensive purposes. I think most, if not all of us, would generally feel like we should live in a society where we don't feel the need to be on guard every step of the way. But we also understand sometimes it just happens. Sometimes it's just like, I don't know. Like, particularly if you are a minority in this country, that's going to be a lot more of an issue that you're going to have to think about. And if you do happen to feel the need that you need to protect yourself and exert this right that you have, maybe look to your local Socialist Rifle Association chapter. They might help you get a lot more informed. Like, I think they have like a YouTube channel where they give you like some like general advice, again, if that's something that you feel like you need to do. Again, only if you feel the need to not, like, if you feel the need to defend yourself. Like, there are other methods that you can use to defend yourself. Like, I mean, if you feel like you're in a situation where you need to like do that much, but if you're like, I'm not in a situation where it's like that bad, I don't know, maybe get a pepper spray or like a knife, I don't know. And the last tidbit is on the topic of guns being used for a specific certain purpose. I'm not particularly a person of that inclination. I am ultimately a reformist and believe that all nonviolent measures must be attempted before anything else. And I hope that a lot of people in power will listen to me, because a very quick Google search shows why they really should listen to people like me. I mean, again, I am generally a pacifist. I'm like very much a pacifist, and I believe that it's in the best interest if we do things, non-violently. But I also understand that there are some situations where unfortunately that just happens. Like, I mean, I'm wearing a Che Guevara shirt right now. I do not necessarily believe we are at that point. We still have a lot of routes left that we can do. If I didn't, and if you didn't, you wouldn't be sitting on your fucking ass doing it, watching or listening to a podcast. You wouldn't watching, recording, or listening up to a podcast at all. If you truly didn't think that was the route that we had to go, if you truly thought that peace was no longer an option, you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be in this position you're in right now. And I hope that one day we will live in a society that no longer needs to even think about the possibility of violence to solve the world's problems. As I've made an episode before, I denounce political violence. I don't like political violence. Political violence is cringe. That's not good. I like peace. I like peace and happiness and kumbaya. I love that. Maybe I might dust off the old, I denounce political violence thing to be put on the top of the thing again, just so people understand this. I've even went so far as to say this in my head. Literally, the thing is, it's like, the non-violent, I guess the non-violent revolutionaries, what you'd call them? Because there's some people who you would call revolutionaries that they're not even, violent. Mahatma Gandhi was broadly a non-violent revolutionary. Martin Luther King Jr. would probably be considered a non-violent revolutionary. That's the thing. The situation is, those are the types that are trying to, stop. They're not necessarily holding the revolutionaries back, but they're trying to get, guys, listen to me. I'm trying to get you guys to listen to me and try to do this stuff peacefully, because if it don't work, then unfortunately there's some people who are more angry than me, and they're going to be a bit more angry. And I've even entertained, the thought experiment of, sometimes those types of people, MLK, got shot in the head for advocating for peace. That happens to far too many people. Many people might think, hey, maybe this route just ain't working anymore. Is that a fate that might befall me? I don't know. Maybe. I mean, I'm just a stupid podcaster, so hopefully not. But I'm just saying, like, that's just a hypothetical scenario. But again, I believe that nonviolence still has a path forward. And I hope that none of us really would even have to consider. Like, I mean, in a good world, we wouldn't even have to have this episode. We wouldn't even have to think about any of the stuff that I said. And hopefully this is the last time I'm going to have to talk about it, because hopefully things turn out good and this all remains just purely hypothetical ideas. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and click the bell to notify when a future video of mine comes out. And if you need more content from me, consider supporting me on Patreon.